So, where have we been so far? We've, of course, seen Noah's sons. I didn't put this slide back in, but God tells Noah and his family to spread out and fill the earth. Mostly we see that with the older two sons. The younger one, Ham, his are the ones that stay more centralized. They're more in kind of that Central Asia area. So we're dealing a lot with the descendants of Ham as we look at this, but not with Abraham. We saw that Abraham has moved from Egypt back to Bethel. Bethel is where he's spending the majority of his life in the Promised Land. He's kind of a little nomadic here. It's not living in a city necessarily, but in that region. He goes up, he rescues Lot. He's come back to Bethel. On the way, he, of course, met Melchizedek near Jerusalem. I think I kind of did something out of order last week, but that's okay. So we had Ishmael being born. He's born from Hagar, which was Sarah's servant. We saw Hagar flee towards Egypt. This happens after Isaac is born, which that's something we get into this week. Hagar was an Egyptian, so she went towards Egypt because likely that's where she knew people. And we saw that that area that she was in may very well be part of the Suez Canal today, because it uses a lake region as part of how they did the canal. So she seemed to have been near one of those on a trade route. All right, Genesis 21. And Sarah saw, there's a lot of S's. Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Therefore she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac. So this is the story of why Hagar and Sarah have sort of a different falling out. Now, Sarah's upset because Hagar has the son she didn't, but this is like a birthday party for Isaac. Forgive me, I didn't write down the whole story. Probably should have. But there's some type of issue going on here between Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael already seems to know that Isaac's the one who's going to get everything. So, might be a little resentment from that. But there's this falling out, and that's what prompts what happens next. Verse 14. So Abram rose early in the morning, took bread and a skin of water, and putting it on her shoulder, gave it to the boy and Hagar, and sent her away. Then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. So God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. This is all Ishmael at this point. So the desert of Paran, this is a region, obviously not a city. So the exact location is going to vary depending on which source you choose to grant the most weight to. But it's the Sinai Peninsula area. And this projector is a little darker, so this may not be as easy to see. But this is actually very lovely at sunset in this original picture. It's a disputed location. It's likely near what's known as Mount Sinai today. And there is very little rain in this area. So there's no soil. You don't see greenery in this picture. You don't see trees. You don't see grass because it doesn't have the rain, so it doesn't have a soil that can grow these things. And there's also some wind, so even if you get some starting to form, it blows away. So this is not a great area to live in, if that's what you're trying to do. This might be a great excursion to climb a hill if you're a mountain climber, but this is not a very hospitable area to be in. Now, we had several places mentioned in this. It's also theorized to be in this general area. Make sure I get this right. Okay, this bottom right city here is Mecca. Mecca in Islamic tradition is the birthplace of Muhammad. And this is an image of modern Mecca. If it's not clear, these are all people. This is a huge deal for Muslims to do a pilgrimage to Mecca because of the Prophet Muhammad. And this is theorized to be one of the possible locations that Ishmael was at. So again, there's multiple theories on this. It's who you give the most credence to. And sometimes I'm just presenting them because that's what some people think. All right, so this area, I should specify, is where we're going to see the Ishmaelites later. We are going to see his descendants, and they are in this area. So if they came down further here first and then moved up here, maybe they came here right in the first place, but very likely to be in this region.
Is that Egypt?
Egypt would be on the other side of the sea here.
Oh, okay. I couldn't tell.
Yeah, this is Arabia. Arabia or Sinai Peninsula, I believe is the proper name. All right, so Isaac. Now this is a somewhat familiar story, Genesis 22. Take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will show you. Moriah is a location that's mentioned a couple of times in Scripture, and before I looked at the map, I wanted to look at another reference for it. So First Chronicles, we have David, and it says, at that time, when David saw the Lord had answered him on the threshing floor of Oron the Jebusite, he sacrificed there. So that was also supposed to be the same area of Moriah. So we've talked before that Abraham would have been in this general area for Bethel. I should have put Bethel on the map. Jerusalem is up here. We've got the western wall is portrayed in the map, so that is one of the possible locations that this could have happened with Isaac. In fact, you'll hear this fairly commonly. I'd say it's probably the more predominant thought in the Jewish tradition that the temple was built on the site where Abraham brought Isaac to. So that one, we're not guessing where that temple is because we have the western wall from the second temple, which was built on top of the foundations of the first temple. So we know where the temple was. That one's pretty clear of all of the things. But there is another theory that we're going to talk about in a minute. So this is near Jerusalem. The region of Moriah is mentioned in Genesis 22. It's the site of Solomon's temple. Now, the Solomon's temple, again, what we know for sure is where the second temple was built. And Scripture tells us that they built it on the foundations of the first temple, which was Solomon's temple. And David buys this land because he wants to build an altar. I didn't want to go too much into that, but it's a site that's mentioned a few times of special significance to the Jewish tradition, and that's part of why that it's seen as a likely location. There's another one, which is the Mount of Olives. That, of course, is very familiar to us from Jesus' ministry. It comes up a few times. This is a more modern picture of the area. You can see there's some trees, but not all over the place. There has been a lot of development. So again, our contrast may not be as good with this projector, but this is these are like some high rises here. This is built up. This is a building. There's more development over here. So a lot of this cleared out area is for residential purposes. People are living here. I should put this one before that one. That's okay. As far as the temple goes, this site has been essentially leveled out. You look around here, and this is a flat area. This is part of the Temple Mount. Under this dome is the only original part. The rest has been leveled. They've built up stuff over top of it. This is the original bedrock under that one spot. So they have built on top of it, which actually became a huge deal in archaeology because you can't dig. But then a couple of years ago, the Muslims, who are actually in control of the Temple Mount area, did an excavation because they were doing some work underneath it, and they just threw a bunch of stuff away. But when they threw a bunch of stuff away, a bunch of Jewish scholars says, wait, we can't excavate here, but we can go through the rubble. And they started sorting through all this construction byproduct that had just been thrown to the side, and they started excavating Jewish history. They have found items there from the temple periods. That's just a fun little extra. But so they have built up the Temple Mount area to this level surface like you see. That's that one area's got the original bedrock. Mount Olives is very near Jerusalem. To put it in perspective, this is a street view that I did. This is supposed to be on Mount Olives, according to Google. And there's this little gold spot over here. That's the Temple Mount. That's where they built the Dome of the Rock, if I'm not mistaken. But I believe so. So you can see on here, Mount Olives, Dome of the Rock. You're within sight distance. With binoculars, you can probably have a pretty good idea what's going on in one versus the other. I'll say I slightly lean towards the theory that Abraham may have come to Mount of Olives for one particular reason. People were living in Jerusalem. And when we read the story of Abraham and Isaac, they seem to be alone. They're going up into the wilderness to offer this sacrifice. And it kind of makes more sense to me that instead of Jerusalem, where Melchizedek is, that they would go to a neighboring mountain. We also see Mount Olives has historical significance. Jesus prayed on this mountain, and it's where the ascension was. Where Jesus goes up to heaven was Mount Olives. So, that's another connection may have made that interesting. Go ahead.
So Mount Moriah and Mount Olives is the same place?
Mount Moriah is the place that Abraham goes to. And then it's a question of which mountain is Mount Moriah. So is Mount Moriah the Temple Mountain, or is it, a second theory is that it's the Mount of Olives, with me leaning slightly towards it's the Mount of Olives. Can't prove it. It's speculation. It doesn't matter for getting to heaven, though.
But they're in the same area.
You're looking at it. This is standing on Mount Olives. This is a Google Street View. That's Jerusalem that you're looking at. So that's very, very close. A couple looks. This was from the same Street View, but I turned it so you could maybe get a little better idea of how this is built up. This looks a lot more like a neighborhood now. And this image looks so Florida to me, having grown up here. You used to go down 75, so much woods. Like if you go north, you still see a bunch of that. But I mean, going south, it just has built up so much where it looks more like this, with some stretches that still have the trees and the woods there, but not nearly what I used to see. In the past, maybe towards Jesus' time, probably would have looked a little bit more like this. This is a grove of olive trees. Now, I could see this as being a very serene place to meditate. I could definitely see this being attractive to Jesus when he was looking for a quiet place. So this is not Mount Olives specifically. This is just a picture of an olive tree grove. Just so I'm clear about what I'm presenting. But I thought it would be interesting for perspective. We have reached the end of the life of Abraham. Now, of course, there's more events that happen, but I'm focusing on travels and destinations, so if we've already been somewhere, I'm not overstating what happened there and looking at where else things happen. So Genesis 25. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age. An old man and full of years, he was gathered to his people, and his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, the field from which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. And there Abraham buried Sarah, his wife. I probably got at least two of those names right. Abraham is buried. Now, I've already touched on this. We start having the Muslims involved here a lot. And they have their own traditions, which can be very interesting for us historically. And it also means that they're in control of some of these areas that are likely significant to us historically. So this is near Hebron. There is a mosque that is built here on what they believe is the Cave of the Patriarchs. Cave of the Patriarchs is where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried. I believe Joseph as well, but I'm doing that part from memory. Because it's linked to Abraham, Muslims are very likely to build a mosque on it because they do claim their ancestry is from Ishmael, from Abraham. So these sites are very significant to them spiritually, and they do want to build these mosques on them. So Cave of the Patriarchs has a mosque. We're going to see more about that in a moment. And I also thought it was significant that you have Isaac and Ishmael here together. They're both here for their father and honoring their father. It's the last time we're going to see them together, but it's also interesting that even if they're not getting along, they do have a certain sense of cooperation happening here. And it also suggests something about the proximity of Ishmael. We saw that a couple maps ago, that it's near Egypt, but it's not that far from the Jerusalem area, and it's close enough that Ishmael is traveling here for his father. So this is that mosque. Al-Abrahami, I'm guessing that's just how they spell Abraham. This is what's called to us, or more commonly, the Cave of the Patriarchs. And it's good to remember that traditional is not always exact. So this is where it definitely, probably, maybe could have been. But this is a site that has been historically very restricted. Now you can see there's a gate here. I'm not sure I got the lock in it very well, but there are levels of this place you cannot go into because you do not disturb the graves. Also, historically, for hundreds of years or more, Jews would not even be allowed in here. They're allowed to have certain religious events here now. Just from reading this, I'm passing, I believe it's about 10 days per year. They're allowed to have religiously significant events here. So that's when the rabbis are allowed in, is for 10 days out of the entire year. This is a place that was very slow to modernize. Only in the last, I think, 10 years have they installed an elevator. They put one in so that people would have easier access to get in, but the Muslims didn't want to have it for a long time. They finally relented and have that now.
And this is near Hebron?
Hebron, yeah.
Hebron? Okay.
Yes.
How did the Muslims end up being in control?
Well, we haven't gotten quite that far yet. So, just over 1,000 years ago, you have Muhammad starts Islam as we know it, certainly as we know it today. He would say it's older than me, but the rest of us say no, it started with him. And this is just all the land that he conquered. So it would have come under the control of Muslims at that time. And this is after the Roman Empire has essentially kicked the Jews out of Jerusalem because they won't stop rioting. So those are events that are, is it 1,000 years or 2,000 years from here? From the life of Abraham. I can't remember if David is the 1,000 years from Abraham or Jesus is the 1,000 years from Abraham. Either way, it's a very significantly long time. But a lot happens in the intervening years. That's a long time for people to move around. It's a very good question. Just a lot's involved. So these are some pictures of the site. I saw this one and thought that just definitely looks like funeral home grass to me. It looks very peaceful. They've done a nice job of keeping this place up. And it's treated with a lot of respect. So Abraham has passed. We're in the lifetime of Isaac. And maybe not everything is as linear. And we have to sometimes, we're catching up on things that happened before. But I think that'll be a little more apparent as we look through. Genesis 25. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac. And Isaac dwelt at Beer Lahai Roi, which is definitely a way you could maybe say. This is on a trade route with Egypt. It's closer to Ishmael, and the Bible is telling us this is where Isaac dwelt after his father passed, but it doesn't say that he moved there after his father passed. So maybe as Isaac is building up his wealth and family, he's moved a little bit away from his father, much like Lot did, and put some space in between them. It would make a little bit of sense. I did not really put... I didn't put Bethel on here, but Hebron is on here, right here. So this is kind of the area that Abraham would live in. And then Isaac has come fairly significantly south here. Now this marks a mountain, but he probably would have been a little closer here in the valley. It's a little bit west. And I said near Ishmael. Ishmael would be over here. We're a little more over here. That's not really a good map for that. Ishmael would be a little more over here. So just a little off this map this way. They're close enough that they're trading buddies at this point. There's a lot of animals present when we're talking about Isaac's life. He's got herds. He's around other people that have herds. There's some disputes over who's grazing where. So this is likely a valley instead of up in the mountains where you don't see as much greenery, not as much for the animals to graze on. This particular picture comes from thetorah.com, just to try and cite my sources as best I can. So over here, it would kind of make sense that you'd see the animals. But Isaac's not there for long. He's going to move, and Isaac moves around a lot. There was a famine in the land. Boy, that's starting to be a familiar theme, isn't it? Besides the first famine that there was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. I highlight that because that's the first time we see the Philistines mentioned. Then the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to the Egypt. Live in the land in which I shall tell you." So Isaac goes to the Gerar area. To put it in perspective, this is that area. And then Jerusalem would be up here. So he's much closer to where his father lived at this point. And I found it interesting the Bible says the Philistines, not the Canaanites. The Bible does not tell us that the Philistines and the Canaanites are the same. We don't really get a clear picture on who the Philistines are descended from. I think that's in part, and this part is speculation, so don't hold me to it. This is probably a mixed race group. We see some lineage in them later that does come from the Canaanites, but they're not called Canaanites. They're not from one of the tribes of the Canaanites. So they're probably a mixed race group. This is lower elevation in Gira. It's not yet up into the mountains. Wikipedia says this is Nehal Guerrera. So looking something like this. And this would be a modern picture. So again, you've got greenery. This area obviously has some water to it. It has a way of sustaining life. And it makes sense that that would be a place you would want to be. There is some dispute, though, because when you've got a lot of animals who all want to eat the same grass, who gets to eat the grass is going to be a big dispute. Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are mightier than we." Then Isaac departed from there and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. So it was a little closer to the city before, and they're like, "You're having too much impact on our area. Go on out a little more to the valley, put some space in between us so we can be good neighbors that way." Then he went up from there to Beersheba. And worth remembering, I've talked about this a couple times, that up is elevation. It's not north. Up and down is not north and south. It's elevation. So he was in Gerar here, but it says he went up to Beersheba, which is to the south. So he's gone from a valley up towards a more elevated area. All right. At the Philistines, he moves away in Genesis 26. Okay, so Beersheba is likely this area, and you can see it's fairly near Jerusalem. So Jerusalem's a good way to anchor it. I try to do that a lot in here when we're talking about this land. One of the most common U.S. Supreme Court cases today, I thought this was significant enough to mention it because it comes up in this time in the Bible a lot, and we've talked about water plenty. But one of the most common Supreme Court cases to this day is about water rights. Particularly, states will fight about water. So think about the Mississippi River. How many states does that touch? That's a lot of states. Now, if you're upriver and decided you wanted to build a really big hydroelectric dam to really take advantage of this water, how many other states does that affect? Okay. So when two states have a fight, where do they go legally? They go straight to the Supreme Court because that's who settles fights between states. So to this day, the most common U.S. Supreme Court cases you'll see are water rights. And almost every year they've got a case going on between two states about water. I use the Mississippi River as an easy example, but you get aquifers are very big. So it might be Nebraska, Oklahoma might have underground water, and one of them wants to use a lot of the water, and the other one wants to use a lot of the water. And we can't use too much of the water or we run out of water, which is a problem. So we have to figure out how to settle these disputes. Go ahead. Go ahead.
One you might not think about with water, there's a battle between Tennessee and Georgia. There's a place where the Tennessee-Georgia line dips down enough that it takes in part of the Tennessee River. And Georgia is trying to divert water from the Tennessee River for the Atlanta corridor going on that way. And that's been going on for years and years.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It takes a lot to settle disputes on that scale.
But a lot of that is how the land uses the water.
Mm-hmm.
And how important land has always been. We can look at it here, moving from place to place, and how each of those areas, you have to have water. You have to have a way to irrigate. You have to have a way to get that water. So it's all
Mm-hmm.
tied together.
And in our modern times, we've also got more uses on top of that. So a big one out of, I believe it was California in recent years, was Nestle, the chocolate company. They purchased a company that had huge amounts of water rights. I believe this was California, but I may be off, so forgive me if I am, because I'm doing this from memory. But they want to bottle that water and sell that water. And you have people who are saying, oh, no, wait a minute, Nestle's not supposed to have those rights. Those rights shouldn't be sold to corporations, and they shouldn't be that high. Well, now you got massive legal fights over the water rights that weren't even originally theirs, but they purchased companies that owned the rights, so they inherit it by that method.
You know, when we talk about famine, how often famine is mentioned and then it comes along. But when you look at this topography, there's not a lot of land for agriculture until really you get over into the Nile River Valley, the northern part of Egypt. Everything else is like what we've seen there. Places, smaller places, valleys where it could be produced, and as the more people are, it's just like anything else, the more the people, the more they eat, the more they need the land to produce the goods. So.
Yeah. And that's a good point, which made me think to come back here. So, Sea of Galilee is fresh water, Jordan River is fresh water, but Dead Sea is salt water. So this water is very unsuitable for people. And then this, of course, is the Mediterranean Sea. So while this might help vegetation to an extent, it's not going to be very sustainable. But the biggest population gatherings are going to be along the river, around the sea, on the Mediterranean Sea. Even in these areas, what you don't necessarily have directly, you might get indirectly through trade, because people are doing movement by water at this point in history, but not long sea expeditions kind of things. So you wouldn't be able to hop on a boat here and necessarily get to Italy, but they probably have a pretty good sense of the way down to Egypt and up a little bit closer to Turkey, likely. So people would have done like coastal hops with their boats at this point. That kind of sea travel is definitely happening at this time. So where's Abraham at? He's kind of staying away from the big population centers. He's out further from the people he's not supposed to have his descendants marry. That kind of thing. That comes up more with the Levitical law, but all right. That's a lot about water. Genesis 27. So, obviously, we've moved ahead a bunch story-wise. We've gone through the life of Abraham. Isaac doesn't get as much print time in Genesis, but we're already up to Jacob and Esau. They're already grown. God has said Jacob is the heir. But not Abraham. Got to correct myself. On Isaac now. Isaac favors Esau. Esau was the older son of twins, so they're very close together. But Esau is more wilderness. He's a hunter. I can kind of just picture him as an old Florida boy. So that's the one his father favors, and their mother Rebecca has more favor towards Jacob. That's just always interesting. It may just be a question of habits. It may be that Rebecca knew, that Jacob was the one who has God's promise, and she seems to value that and say, it might explain some of her decisions, as she's saying, this is the one that God said is supposed to get everything. The words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah, which is that Isaac was getting up there in age. He's going to pass soon, and then he can take care of this Jacob problem once his father is not in the picture. She sent and called for Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, "Surely your brother Esau comforts himself concerning you by intending to kill you. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran." Okay. Who you get married to is very important. I could probably just stop there, couldn't I? There are instructions we see given here about who you are and are not to marry. And a lot of that is lineage based. So, in Genesis 24, Abraham has his servant go find a bride for Isaac. He doesn't get one from the land that he's in, which is the Canaanites. He doesn't get one from Egypt. He sends the servant back to his homeland to find Rebekah. Okay. "I will make you swear by the Lord God of heaven and earth that you will not take for my wife a son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but you shall go to my country and to my family and find a wife for my son Isaac." As Jacob flees, we find him in Bethel. We've seen Bethel repeatedly. This is particularly where Abraham was. This is where Abraham had his vision in Genesis 15. That was back about slide 36. Jacob will build an altar here, which is significant. That's what his grandfather Abraham did. Now, the Bible doesn't give us any interactions between Abraham and Jacob. I'm not going to say that means it never happened. This is not a history of Abraham. This is not a history of Jacob. This is about our relationship with God. But we see Jacob doing something in the spiritual sense. He's following the mentor, the example of Abraham. And I think that's very significant that we see that here, because it's not something we see Isaac doing. It's not something we see Ishmael doing. Jacob is the one who's doing this. And he makes his rather famous vow to God that has certainly been the subject of many lessons. Try to do this real fast. So Jacob meets Laban in Genesis 29. Jacob went on his journey, came to the land of the people of the east, and Jacob said to him, "My brethren, where are you from?" "We are from Haran." Then he said to him, "Do you know where Laban, the son of Nahor?" "We know him." And he said to him, "Is he well?" "He is well, and look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep." So we have the land of Syria here, and we're talking about this range. You can see the greenery on the topographical map. Lebanon is down here. Jerusalem would be significantly down here, and that'll be a good point to pick it up next week. Thank you.